We think that when stakeholders, which this bill, this resolution includes, come together, that great things can be done to make our criminal justice system work and function better. Some of the examples of those over the last few years have been the task force that this body created to address mistaken eyewitness identification, the task force that was created by this body to address the problem of false confessions by requiring that custodial interrogations be electronically recorded. A working group that Commissioner Perry put together. There was no legislation that created that group, but legislation was enacted as a result of that group's work that addressed the problem of racial profiling. As a result, we have one of the strongest racial profiling laws in the United States. And lastly, a group that has just commenced its work within the last couple of months regarding enhancing and improving discovery procedures in criminal cases. We think that when organizations and people of goodwill are brought to the table, that extraordinary things can and are accomplished. And let me just say thank you to Representative Williams and the sponsors for their thoughtfulness in including the public defender as a member of this commission. There's a good reason to create a commission like this, and I'm inspired to say that by the words that Representative Williams uttered a while back. This is a difficult and complex and uncomfortable issue. And the thing that's important to recognize is that reasonable minds can differ and do differ about the best way to approach the problem of sex trafficking and prostitution and the various public safety and public health issues that have been created as a result of our current laws. You've heard the experts say that some of the research that's been done, our current laws result in a increase in violence, exploitation, stigma, and that the work of this group could be to address those questions using the best available data and research and information. Finally, although there are a lot of moving parts to this resolution, and meaning that there are a number of things that a task force would be required to address, I was thinking this morning as I was preparing my testimony about two laws that were repealed just since I've been practicing law. First that I'll mention is possession of a needle and syringe. That was repealed maybe 10 years ago. I could be wrong. The reason that came about was because while we thought that laws like that protected society, what they really did is they made it more difficult to obtain needle and syringes, which increased disease and resulted in massive problems with tainted needles and such. The other criminal law that has been repealed, this goes back a little bit further, is the abominable and detestable crime against nature. It's hard to believe that within recent memory that oral sex in Rhode Island was a crime. And Judge Wiley, I recall, wrote a decision declaring that statute unconstitutional, and then I believe it was repealed sometime later. So again, it's the same kind of thing. We're looking at changes in mores, we're looking at changes in society, and this body took action in that regard. A task force like this could make recommendations to this body that would take a little bit of the heat off, depending upon what its conclusions were. But in making thoughtful recommendations, again, how to improve public safety and public health. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Michael? Do you remember the last time that statute was prosecuted?
I'm hoping you didn't prosecute it, Mr. Chairman, but I suspect maybe...
Guess what the name of the case was anecdotally? The Brown University prostitution ring case.
I remember
Stanley
that
Henshaw.
one. Stanley Henshaw. I remember that. David Cicilline was the defense lawyer in that case.
The young David Cicilline with John Sheehan. Yep,
I heard they tried circles around you in that case,
They did.
Mr. Chairman.
they did.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I remember that case very well. I remember
Yeah.
I remember it very well.
And the irony is, given the context of what we're talking about here, its notoriety came from, because I was obviously the prosecutor, it came from the titillating nature of it being Brown University and not the fact that it was involving students who were being prostituted by a wealthy businessman,
So what I remember, the flip side of that is, I remember, and I'm not saying this is anything that, in fact, I'm quite sure this isn't something that you did as a prosecutor, but oftentimes in close cases where there were issues of identification or consent or the evidence was weak, the Attorney General would charge the abominable and detestable crime against nature because consent would not be a defense in that case.
Correct.
But the victim was never charged with that. So there were several cases where guilty verdicts were returned on that. People went to jail, and that can't happen anymore. So, but thank you for sharing that.
1989, so it wasn't that long ago.
It's not very long ago at all, Mr.
Not in our
Chairman.
lives,
No,
anyways,
it's
no.
certainly not.